Hey everyone, Brian here. Before we get started with this episode, I just wanted to let you know that if you've been thinking about joining the Many-Sided Media Patreon, now may be the very best time because we're offering some great discounts now through December 8th. If you're interested in trying this out, use the code MSM10. That's MSM10 for 10% off your first month as a patron. But if you want to try us for a full year, you can use code MSM20, that's MSM20, to get 20% off your first year. We put out a ton of great stuff in our Patreon. I believe right now we have over 60 hours of bonus podcasts, plus original games that we've designed and original music that has been released on our show. We're releasing new stuff on our Patreon every single month, and it is the very best way to support this show. So if you want to try it out, go to patreon.com/manysidedmedia and use the codes MSM10 for 10% off your first month or MSM20 for 20% off your first year.
Hello and welcome to our end of season talkback for My First Dungeon, Paint the Town Red. This season, 4 of your favorite vampires partied in the last gasps of the Roaring 20 in New York City in the adventure It Never Sleeps, run by our very own Brian Flaherty, who has joined me along with the designer of this game, Zach Cox. How you guys doing?
Thank you so much for having me on, guys. It's good to be here. Back for the 4th podcast we've recorded now between the 2 seasons.
4 down, infinite to go.
Infinite to go.
But if we can't get ahead, then we're better off dead. So why don't we paint the town red? So why don't you paint the town red, honey? So why don't we paint the town red?
So we're going to talk all about this season. We're going to talk about, what went right, what went wrong, and we're going to talk about the adventure and sort of the future of this game. But first up, Zach, the question we always like to ask, how'd we do?
Yeah, it was an amazing season. The moment that we decided we were going to do our Orbital Blues season last year, the award-winning season you guys did in the end, I knew that Paint the Town Red was going to be something that you guys would knock out the park, honestly. Like, it's a similar game to Orbital Blues, same mechanics, same focus on emotional storytelling and character resolution, and you did that. The adventure we put together, between that you guys wrote and then working with Soul Muppet to publish. So just to mention, if you played this season and you liked it, you'll be able to play it in your table at home with similar characters. All the same factions and characters from the actual play will appear in the adventure.
And more.
And how amazing those characters were. So many sort of large-than-life figures, all the different factions and NPCs, and also the characters from the season played by the spectacular cast. Really great fun to listen to. And I hope everyone else had as much fun listening to it as I did, honestly.
Yeah, the whole cast really crushed it.
Brian, I guess, speaking of this adventure, what was it like running something that you wrote in this way? Like, obviously you normally do a certain amount of GM prep, but this might have been more prep than you usually do because you wrote a full adventure.
I joked about this somewhere that this was like Schrodinger's season of this was the most prep I've done and also the least prep I've done in a weird way, in that it was the most prep because we wrote out the entire adventure and world and all this stuff. And then it was also the least prep because once we had the whole world written, I really did rely on let's just roll on the tables that we've made. So it's I knew all the answers on the tables, but I had no idea which one I was going to get at any one time, which was really freeing as a game master to just kind of rely fully on the improv and just let the world come to you. And we made a great story from the things that the world threw at us. And it's also equally fun in that world building part of my brain to build the whole world and then, make sure that the machinations within it function. And I think both ends of it really worked really well. And we're scratched different itches in a great way.
It's really interesting because obviously in that last podcast, I promised you a low prep game, and you're a bit like, well, because it's actual play, like, you know, we do a little bit more prep than you would normally doing it at home. Do you feel like that was still the case? Did you actually do that much beyond the initial reading, or was it really just ripping it all off the random tables?
It was ripping it all off the random tables. I think, I mean, I wrote like the episode intros and outros, you know, just so there was something really meaty to draw people in. But outside of that, not much prep. I think between recordings, Elliot and I would kind of sit down and be like, okay, here's where we're at. What does that mean? And what, you know, threads could we possibly be changing? But then all that would kind of go to shit the second we rolled on the consequences table, and it's like, oh, never mind, the world's different now.
Yeah.
So we really did just use the random tables and do a very, very, very low prep game. And still, you know, you listen to the season, it does not feel like a low prep game.
Absolutely not, no. I mean, the interesting thing for me about the season and how it relates to the adventure is that you will play a very different campaign of It Never Sleeps if you ever bring the version that is written in the book to the table to what happened, because obviously the characters in each campaign push the adventure in a direction that it can never be anticipated by what's on the tables and can only interact with them and emerge from there. But your campaign is going to be really different to the one that we had on the mics this season because of, you know, Cain and Abel. Our characters really pushing that in around. Obviously, the Hudson River, the sort of one of my favorite factions in all of Paint the Town Red, actually, now, in terms of how it's written, the sort of evil, mercurial river spirit with all these different spooky presentations. But we never really met any personable entities of Hudson like they're written in that adventure, because it was entirely pushed through our reinvention of one of the oldest stories in the Bible, you know?
Yeah,
Old
some
Testament
light blasphemy, you know, for the season.
Yeah, some light blasphemy. Yeah, I don't think, I think even knowing that we were going to have Cain and Abel in this, I didn't know quite how biblical we were going to get with this season, which I think was maybe, you know, a number of the cast working out some, you know, threads of Catholicism that still lingered in their bodies.
I mean, what is Catholicism is very vampire-y, right?
Oh,
yeah, that's always going to happen. But also religion as well. You know, something that's worth mentioning is that, and this is, I don't know if Drac knows this, but like in Vampire, the Requiem, and I think Masquerade as well, all the vampires descend from Cain as like the first ever vampire who murdered someone. So I was listening to them going, oh, okay, well, we're going to have Cain. That's interesting, because it's not going to be the vampire, the world of darkness one, either of them. But it's just interesting to see where it comes from. You know, we got a really interesting and classically, you know, exciting set of characters from different parts, different backgrounds, and different moods, like all of whom doing a really good job of conveying what it means to play a character in this game, ultimately, and to be a person in a world where the things that happen in Paint the Town Red happen, you know, the feelings that happen there continue.
It is also fun to look at kind of like moments where we rolled for different NPCs and see what could have been. Like in episode 2, when we're looking, they get to Margino and Bane, and they look behind the bar and there's someone there serving drinks. It ended up being
Lawrence Fielding.
Yes, Lawrence Fielding, Dr. Lawrence Fielding, who was like, you know, historian. The other person on that die roll they didn't pick was Count Victor Lustig, who is an infamous con man. So like, you know, where would the story have gone then? You know, same thing with like, I think when we rolled Fedora Fred, the other person on the other end was Hot Dog, who we see later on, who's just like the embodiment of a dirty water hot dog, who's just outside every cool party. Like, what would the story have looked like if that was, you know, how would we have beaten Hudson with Hot Dog instead of with Fedora Fred?
You'd make the water dirty, right?
Make the water dirty. Yeah,
he'd like Hudson River.
He'd suck in all the Hudson River. That actually might work.
Yeah, maybe. Good. I mean, not as well as putting Fedora Fred on his head, but yeah, no. And it's really interesting because, like, with every time that it's really exhilarating as a writer and a designer of a game to like put the setting that you've envisaged in the hands of other people and see them write things, right? And you get some really interesting like characters you wouldn't expect normally. Like, there's a lot of there's a lot of It Never Sleeps characters that like maybe I could have envisaged who are like versions of the like characters I've written previously or someone else has written and we've moved around, or iterations or whatever. But there's also like entire mythologies that I could have never dreamed of. Like, I never imagined Hudson the river spirit. Like, Paint the Town Red didn't really have like spirits before. And after you made both Hudson and Fedora Fred, they're like a new form of magical entity that I have to explain now. And also if you consider this part of like Paint the Town Red extended canon, this campaign, which of course you would because it's like a officially sponsored, partnered campaign, I also have to reckon with the fact that God is real now. Right? You've added Jesus Christ and God, at least like in his, maybe not Jesus Christ because it may be a sort of more Old Testament interpretation, but there is something capable of doing that. And but now I have to reckon with what it means that there can be a possessed fedora in my game.
Of course.
And it used to be a fez. Was thinking about being a ball cap. You know, it's just passed throughout the ages.
But it went so Fez Fred, would that have been? You know, like
Fez, maybe it would have been like Fez Friedrich or something. You know, he kind of adapts to the times.
One of my favorite things about these adventures, right, is that it is the iteration of these characters between all the different adventures, the NPCs and the factions, right? So that when you move to a new location within our campaign, Lawrence Fielding's a great example. In the 1860s adventure we wrote, he's like a 20-year-old historian who's just discovered the undead exist and is like going around and interviewing undead. Mm-hmm. Whereas like the Lawrence Fielding in your campaign is like 80. Because he's in his late 80s, right? Or he is undead now, right? You can see how those characters change through time. There's some really good examples of doing it one way and starting with a young character and aging them up. But there was another character who we like didn't meet in this adventure, who's the Scream Eater, who is the guy from Coney Island, who's like a really ancient old vampire who's too old to scare anybody, so he just runs the fairground at Coney Island and eats people who are running around in the roller coasters. Mm-hmm. Whereas like I had to take that character and be like, well, what were they doing in 1000 AD Afghanistan? Like a version of that character who's like younger and more violent and more willing to hunt people. And then like you could feasibly in that campaign meet that character in Party Crashing in Splendid Ghazni and then like be transported 1,000 years later and see what they're doing across this time. So it's really interesting to like see how the characters and the mythos of stuff changes throughout the different adventures and how it's all going to build together into one big like combined mythology that other people will be able to contribute to in the future, because there's a big third-party license that's going to exist for other people to see what these various characters are doing at various points in history, and the ability to add player characters that have appeared in campaigns to adventures you've written and sort of move all kinds of stuff around. And that's sort of the promise of the game at large and what the scene could be like in the future of all of these stories all linking together, which is really exciting, you know, something that really lights my mind about when I'm thinking of the future of the project.
Kind of, you know, on that, and this is the thing we talked about in the final talkback. There was originally like a stinger at the very end of the final episode that was like where the characters go next. And it was George Ludot screeching up in the night cabbie's cab, jumping out and saying, my dear, we've sold it. We've sold your script to Hollywood. We're going west.
Perfect.
So like I can see a world where like all of a sudden, you know, that's the thing. Now you do 1940s, you know, 1950s Hollywood, but with vampires. And like, what does that look like? Which is very much like Interview with a Vampire is kind of doing that in a recent season.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was one of the things that was like so exciting, Zach, about writing for this game was this idea of like you are creating a new and interesting sort of vampire and undead mythos. And like that comes down to these roll tables for Banes, I think was such a fun thing to play with, and like really informed our season. And I feel like New York in particular was just a fun setting to put it's one of those things where it's like no one's special in New York is kind of one of those vibes where it's just like, I don't care how big in your britches you were in your hometown, when you come to New York, like you're kind of level the playing field, and making that true for ancient powerful vampires that have like conquered cities in the past now just come to New York, and it's like, yeah, now he runs a roller coaster. It's just really, it was such a fun setting to put all of these different things in. I guess kind of going back to Brian, what was your favorite thing you wrote for the adventure versus ran in the game, maybe?
I think that a person that Fedora Fred's probably my favorite, but second to that is a person we only got to see a little bit, and I like better on the page, and I wish we got to see them more, was Old Man Knack.
Yeah.
Same thing. Thinking the same exact thing when you were saying that. Yeah.
Whose full name is Nick Knack. And the joke name was coming from Nick Knack Paddywhack.
Yeah.
Nick Knack Paddywhack, give a dog a bone. So the idea is he's a living skeleton who keeps walking through Central Park and getting his bones stolen by the various dogs in Central Park. And the idea of him is just, he is constantly losing bones, and he's beloved by everyone because he's just a really nice guy. And I could see a version of this campaign that is like a fun side project of, like in video games when there's always like the bonus stars you have to collect. It's just like finding Old Man Knack's bones.
Oh yeah, you're running around
city.
Grabbing 30 bones in under 2 minutes. Yeah.
Or it's just like, at the end of every episode, all of a sudden we find a different bone and we, slowly bring them back.
I mean, my headcanon is that Dog Kane had been stealing them all. There's like a
Kane in wolf form. Yeah.
That Kane is nabbed.
Oh, that's good. We should have done that. Oh, that's funny.
I've definitely got my character that I'm saddest didn't show up.
Oh, hit it.
Which is hidden as the fourth NPC of the Tammany Hall faction. Fucking Aaron Burr, right? Which is particularly funny because I'm assuming Chinook does not know that as a fact.
No.
But the musical that Savali wrote was Fuck Hamilton, the Aaron Burr story, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that, independent of that occurring, Aaron Burr could have just shown up as a character in this adventure would have very much chuckled me. But you can't win everything.
It's very funny because I knew I wanted to do Tammany Hall right from the get-go because it's just such a big, it's the biggest political machination that ever happened in New York outside of maybe Robert Moses. And it's literally the phrase stuffing a ballot box comes from Tammany Hall. It's a epicenter of corruption and political machinations. But in its early days, it didn't Aaron Burr was an early member, I don't know if it was a founding member, but a very, very early member. And that political party still existed, around the time of the revolution before it became this very corrupt New York thing in the late 1890s, early 1920s. But it was just so cool to be researching that and knowing the broad strokes of Boss Tweed as being the, outside of Robert Moses, the evil, New York City politician. And then just looking down the list of people and Aaron Burr's on there, I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
That guy's going in.
It's the best part of getting to write undead is because then all of a sudden you can be like, yeah, actually, no, he didn't die. He's still kicking.
Absolutely.
He's still around. Yeah, it was all I could do to just not include all of my favorite New York historical figures in the adventure. We had to have some original people.
That's true. We definitely did have to cut some.
It's an interesting thing because I originally wrote in the manuscript that there shouldn't be any historical figures. You should all work in fictional characters that don't exist. But that got dropped really quickly, particularly because I realized I had to put Vampire Nero in the Rome adventure because I don't know how much vampire ancient history but there was this whole thing Nero reborn. They believed that he wasn't actually killed and that he was staying somewhere, maintaining in the same youth as he was when he was perceived to have died, and he was going to come back and bring the apocalypse. I was like, that's a vampire. That's just a vampire.
Yeah,
fully a vampire.
And Vernon was like, well, okay, I've got to break my own rule. I'm deleting the rule in the first place. We can have historical figures now. That's allowed. But yeah, it's good. It's good fun.
I think that's one of my favorite. I love twisting history and playing with that. I ran a D&D campaign a long time ago that was magical Italian Renaissance. like right at the end of the Renaissance. And the idea was like magic was disappearing from the world because the great Renaissance masters were dying, and they were like there were big restrictions on magic within the world. And we had, you know, the Catholic Church and the Borgia Pope were all there at the same time. So like the Pope was a vampire, and, you know, the Black Death was like literally a dragon plague type thing coming through. I like taking realities that people know and just giving them that little twist, that little like magical fun out of the box twist, because then everyone knows the expectation, they know the language you're speaking, and then when you subvert it, it's always like a big ooh, wow, ooh, that's fun. So I really do love playing with historical characters.
It's like this is a thing I've heard before, but oh wait, what'd you just do with this?
It's like hearing a really cool cover of a song.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I didn't know this could be played like that.
Yeah. Brian, I do want to check in on one of the worries that you had back when we spoke to Zach before this season, which is this is a game that didn't want a typical adventure or quest. It was, you know, a campaign or a session is more like a night out than a quest. And you had this feeling of, I don't know what a session looks like. And now you've done 4 of them. So how did that end up feeling, not running a game that had sort of a typical adventure or quest structure?
I think no matter what, like I definitely forced the quest in there a little bit.
Sure.
but that's just, you know, that's just me. But I think you definitely hear it in the first, really, I guess that's not true. I think the first 3 episodes really did, each of them was a different night out. You know, there was the bar / the Knuckle Club, there was Margino and Bane, and there was the V line. And when I thought about it, like kind of like mini one-shots almost, it started to make more sense to me. And I think by the end of the first episode, I got it. I was like, okay, I get what this is. This is like fragments, it's scenes of things. And I think the thing that really made it kind of click was the consequences aspect of, okay, we're going to play through a thing, and then depending on our, you know, quote unquote score, like, you know, how bad we got, how crazy we got, then the world's going to go topsy-turvy, and the next night's going to be even tougher or more chaotic. And once I saw that building pressure mechanism and like how effective it was at just like, you know, many lost all their hoes, all of the factions are against you, this person died, you know, the second I start to see how much the pressure builds and how quickly it builds, then I was like, oh, I don't need the adventure structure of like increasing pressure, because it's kind of happening mechanically for me. And then I just get to play in the parts that are most interesting, that are, you know, what is the thing that causes that pressure? How do we respond to that pressure? What causes the next pressure? How do we respond to that pressure?
Right.
The bit of which you did the best in following the advice in the book, I got to say, Brian, is that my favorite thing that I've written about all of these pacing tools, which are designed to help you and get you in the space, you know, the consequences, it's all happening tonight, the downtime system, all the kind of spaces those were. When we did our first episode, it was really tightly following that structure. Mm-hmm. And by the end of episode 3, there wasn't a downtime or a consequences or an it's all happening tonight session, because one of the pieces of advice in the book that is very specific to how to do this is these are tools for you to use while you're getting your feet wet with what's happening. And by the end of the campaign, everyone's going to understand what's happening. The stakes are going to be there, and you don't have to keep all of these like per session mechanics to actually be per episode like they should be when you start, because it's going to help you learn what's happening and meet the new people and make sure everything's happening in the right order. But the structure becomes looser as you play, and you and your players become more confident in the space you're inhabiting. So actually the fact that the final episode you did included none of those session pacing mechanics is absolutely perfect, because that's how the thing is meant to look, you know? So yeah, you not only did you use the rules I wrote well, but you also followed the advice to ignore them about a third of the time, you know, which is really good and confident games mastering.
It is really great to have a game set you up for success in that way of like, here are the training wheels, here are the guide rails, use them. And then by the time you get to the end of the block on these training wheels, they can fall off and you can ride the bike. And then if at any point, I feel like if we had done, many, many sessions of this game, or if we were playing this over a campaign, I could see how this would happen of like towards the end of time in a city, that scaffolding starts to fade away. And then when you come into a new city, it's like, okay, great. We can kind of go back to this more scaffolded, structured play until those stakes become really clear again.
Yeah.
It's a great thing to remember for, I think, like any role-playing game, of use some of that scaffolding that exists until everything is easy and clear, and until you're riding free and clear of the training wheels, and then you can do whatever you want.
And the even more useful thing about the full version of the book, which we've had on Backit and is now making its way towards people, is that there are even more of those optional tools in for pacing around there. There's a set of rules for what happens if your characters enter like full violent war with people, which actually moves consequences away from an end of session thing and just make them something that the GM can create at any time in exchange for some chaos. And there's also things are moving a bit slowly. Your characters and players are getting bored. And then there are bonuses towards which character has the most chaos at the end of a session, right? So you say, you guys are feeling really rubbish. You need a party to get your bones moving. And then lost chaos in that session becomes pain. That is like the leveling experience-esque resource for when something hurts and your character voluntarily loses pulse. So that's a way to get like an ability and a half worth of XP in inverted commas if you're the saddest vampire. And all of these things are like modular tools you can move around to help you build a campaign. There's also this is a big party, roll out the red carpet mechanic, which is a name I'm really proud of. Is like, we've got a big thing happening we're going to prepare for, and everyone's going to know about it, but get a bunch of bonuses as we like pre-game, pre-drink for this big thing that's going to happen. So there's even more stuff coming to put in the hands of GMs so that you can bowl with the gutters as they're there. So there's more freedom, but there's also a training version that comes with more help and more tools, because like that's very much the type of games master and the type of designer that I am. I like to have lots of itty little bits that are helpful for me and my players, so that I can use my experience or my lack of experience to work out what needs to happen in a situation, and basically giving the GM as many tools to succeed as I can, so that everyone at the table has a great game.
I was literally just yesterday trying to fix a door, and I needed a screwdriver. And I looked in our toolbox. We got a bunch of different types of screwdrivers and stuff. And this is a great thing to remember for game masters of all of these things are just tools in your toolbox. You're not going to use all of them all the time, but when you have a certain problem, like I need a Phillips head screwdriver of this size, great. I pull out that exact thing. Boom, it's there. The more tools you have doesn't mean you have to use all of them. You're not going to use a hammer to fix a screw, but you have that hammer available to you when you see a nail.
Yeah.
Bugs. They're remarkably small and come in more varieties than you could count, even if you happen to be particularly good at counting. They're also, since the advent of the Mysteriocalypse, the ones in charge. Oh, there are still cats and squirrels and fish, but humans having gone the way of the dinosaur, whatever that is, the world they left behind is decidedly more chitinous and scuttly than it used to be. And it's this new, ugly world that Pico lets you explore. By solving mysteries, by roaming through ruins, by battling beasts, and by riding cats or other animals trained as Pico Titans, friendly to adventurous bugs and just as willing to wander. Pico is a tabletop role-playing game by Felix Isaacs, the creator of the Wild Sea, for 2 to 6 players, a Wild Words game about small adventures in a very, very big world. Pico is now live on Kickstarter. That's Pico on Kickstarter.
If you want to try Dungeons & Dragons but don't know where to start, you should know about StartPlaying.com. D&D rulebooks can be overwhelming, and playing with experienced players as a newbie can be intimidating. But at startplaying.com, they make it so easy to find a beginner-friendly D&D game. Plus, they've got this great new feature to help you find that perfect game. It's their Learn to Play D&D quiz. Just answer a few short questions and they'll match you with a professional dungeon master and a bunch of other new players so everyone at the table can learn the game together. And you don't need to worry about creating a character or buying dice or anything else that might be getting in your way. All you need to do is start playing. And if you want to try other tabletop games like Good Society or Orbital Blues or The Wild Sea, you can find those too. So if you want to slay some dragons and make some friends, head on over to startplaying.com. Are you looking for your next tabletop RPG adventure? Tabletop Bookshelf is a new place to find the best TTRPGs and solo games, including titles featured on the Many-Sided Media Network like Orbital Blues, Project Echo, and The Wild Sea. With a carefully curated selection and new arrivals every week, you'll find everything from stunning hardcovers to imported zines. Fresh takes on fantasy to solo mystery horror. Every purchase is packed with care and shipped directly to your door. As a Many-Sided Media listener, you can now get 10% off your first order with code MSM10. That's MSM10, now through New Year's Eve. And if your order is over $50, shipping is free. So join thousands of other TTRPG explorers and discover your next great adventure at tabletopbookshelf.com.
So, Brian, I wanna dip back into our worries from the first interview. So you had this other main worry, which was wanting to make an environment that allows the players to get into the spirit of this system, namely being sad, disaster bastard vampires. When it came to establishing that system right away for the players, what were kind of the most helpful things for you in doing that?
So I came into this season. I'm not a particularly big like vampire guy. Like that's not a big touchstone for me, just like culturally. So I was particularly worried because that's not a thing I know a ton about. I know like kind of the baseline cultural references, but it's not like a thing that I've read a ton of books about or watched a ton of movies on. But I think the thing that made the most difference for me, and probably was one of the more defining features of the campaign, was rolling on the Bane's table. That table and those rolls that we got ended up defining the game probably more than just about anything else.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we got stealing a shadow and burning it, which was a ton of Savali's storyline. It's how we were introduced to Don Estrazio. And it was kind of this like, looming thing the whole time. We had the pig bone, splitting his skin with the pig bone, which was just like cool vibes. And then it gave us that great scene.
I remember
Fitzroy.
Ed even surprised, just like totally. I had forgotten about the pig bone, and then Ed pulled that out as Fitzroy, and it was like, oh shit.
I had forgotten about it, and I think when we rolled it, I was like, ooh, that's a cool one. I don't know if it'll come up, but I was like, I'm not going to do anything with it. I'll let the players do it, and I'd fully forgotten about it by the time Ed pulled it out. And then drowning became fully like one of Fitzroy's things. It also related back to Hudson. It's like, great, we got drowning. I have a water spirit bad guy. Okay, now he's going to be in the campaign. Like that was fully the reason why that whole, like pretty much why the whole story happened was we rolled drowning as a potential Bane. Fitzroy tied it to his character. Ed tied it to Fitzroy. And then I knew Hudson was there. So like, great. Now Hudson is connected to Fitzroy in some way. I don't quite know what. I don't know how much. But that was where that seed was planted that grew into the tree of this entire season.
Yeah. And it's funny to think how different the season would be with 3 different Banes because, Zach, 100 of those?
100? Yeah. 100. There's lots of big ones, but some of them are really difficult to do, and some of them are really weird, and some of them are very vibesy, and I think that was like a perfect combination. Your D6 on the table was drowning, which is like a really interesting way to kill a vampire, especially when like you think about a lot of the common associations with like running water and stuff like that. But that building into the Hudson for this adventure is like particularly huge.
100%.
Breaking their skin of a pig bone is like a super weird one. I can't remember what that comes from, but because it's so early on the list, I think that is from a historical culture of vampirism. And then stealing their shadow and setting it on fire. Oh, what a big one. That's one of the ones
so
I'm 100% certain. I just went, vibes.
Vibes,
It's
baby.
one of the heaviest vibes one. My favorite that we didn't use here that is like of a similar energy to that is killing a sword and using its ghost to slay them. Like a similarly like
Wow, that's
two-step process. And like the most important thing about those baits for me is about like how they build into the setting that we have there, because like it is the most emergent part of the world building, right? And generally speaking, there's very little like universal world building for Paint the Town Red, apart from like this is what a vampire is, and it's not relevant that vampires appeared at this certain time, or you know, doing this or doing that. You know, this is the culture. It's all very like what happens in each city, but the Banes become the main kind of lens for how the culture of the city shifts through what is true in this campaign, right?
Yeah.
The Banes and the characters are like the two biggest like amplifiers for that, and the way that you took your factions and remixed them to relate specifically to the Banes you had, right?
Right.
The way that the Sixth Family and Don Estrazio, she has like a collection of stolen shadows on coat hooks in the sewers underneath Chinatown that she can set on fire because the room is filled with gasoline all in a moment and kill like a third of the undead in the city. That's massive. Like Hudson now being not only a river spirit that like you have to cross to get to New Jersey or whatever, is instead being like the god of killing vampires by drowning, right?
And invincible to all the Banes of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, because he can't be set on fire, doesn't have any skin, and you can't steal the shadow because he's a river. You know, like how do you deal with that?
That was a great moment of us realizing that, because I knew going into that final session that we already killed a faction with Margino and Bane. I wasn't going to let them kill Hudson. I was like 100%. That is you cannot kill this thing, and especially after realizing that none of the Banes they knew about would work. And I went into that, I was like, that is something I will not let them do. Like they'd really have to blow me out of the water for me to be like, okay, you kill Hudson. Yeah. And then of course they didn't try to kill Hudson.
It's your weak spot for Fedora Fred, Brian. You should have possessed at most one body of Hudson rather than the whole goddamn river. You know?
Oh no. The second Ed did it, I was like, I gotta let that happen.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Especially when he like disappeared from the campaign. These characters, man, they're all so good.
Great.
Very
mix
much
of characters.
fun.
Yeah.
Great mix of characters.
I mean, like Fitzroy's just like drowned Steve Buscemi, Michael Caine, Schmergel, but Minnie being like the life of every party she's at, the incredible violence of Caine, and then Chinook / Savali's refusal to heed any call to adventure in a serious way, right? And the fact that you've got such a team put together of fantastic, talent of actors and improvisers and actual players and all the things you need to do to be able to do the job of being a cast member and actual play so well is just, you know, credit to your the show and your team and also the people you work with. So just really enjoyed all those characters so much.
We got some good folks.
Zach, I have a moment I actually want to ask you about from the series that I think maybe is like particularly thematic to the game. It's the end of episode 2 when Minnie's pulse reaches 10, but she is still so profoundly sad. And there's this line I think from Brian that's like, being more alive doesn't necessarily mean you're happier, you just feel more. And I'm curious, like, thematically how that felt, like that moment, particularly as the writer of the game.
Yeah, I mean, I was driving home from MCM, a convention I just spent 3 weeks doing, and I don't think my pulse was in a fantastic place myself after that show. And like hearing that moment of like, and what was the accompanying line like, and then drank him, like squeezed him flat like jam or something? What was it?
Or
like,
toothpaste?
Ketchup or something,
ketchup,
right?
yeah.
Ketchup. Just utterly tragic. And like, I think that's the thing, right? That is almost the most crushing about the entire design of the game and the way that Minnie and Dylan's characterization reflected that, is that the game of playing Paint the Town Red is like, it does not say in the sheet at any point that your character is required to increase their pulse, or there is no actual mechanical incentive for your pulse being at any number above 1, as long as you do not choose to involve yourself in a combat, right? You can de-escalate the situation, you can walk away. Like, there's no reason that anyone's pulse should actually be high. And it doesn't say like, at 10 points you are happy, well done, thumbs up, right?
Right.
The chase, the hunt for happiness and joy, whatever that means to an individual person, is entirely based on whether you as the player and the character themselves decide if that's enough. And I'll tell you one thing, I've never known a Paint the Town Red vampire to stop indulging their passion or decide it might be better to do something else because their passion is high enough, right? Even if Minnie's pulse is at 10, that might not be what she wanted. And it can never be enough, right? Nothing. It's very difficult to be a vampire who is content.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the whole thing, because if you were a content vampire, you wouldn't be the character that this adventure or this game is about. You know, you'd have retired. You'd no longer be hunting this in the same way, you know. And I think that speaks a lot to the design of the game, but also the specific heart-crushingness of that moment.
Yeah.
Where I felt my blood move from my body like I was a ketchup squeezed little packet. Horrid.
I think that moment was probably the moment in the game where I most like going into that moment. I knew that Minnie was at 10 pulse, and I had equated high pulse to like success or like, you know, being happy or whatever. And I think that moment of having to deal with that cognitive dissonance in my mind of what I thought the rules said and what the rules actually said and what Minnie was doing was probably the moment I like fully got the game. Like everything fully clicked, because then it was me going, wait a minute, high pulse doesn't mean she's happy. That's just like my, you know, board game brain saying a high number equals win.
Big number good.
It's like, no. It just ends up being this person is feeling a lot. What are they feeling? And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I can make doing good feel really bad.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun.
When your pulse is high, your heart runs hot, your skin is warm and flushed. The higher the pulse, the easier it feels to get on with your life. You almost feel human.
Right.
At no point in that sentence does it use the word happy.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Sorry, gamers.
Turns out being human
sucks.
actually sucks sometimes. Ugh. What a season. It feels like we lived in this season for longer than 4 episodes. I feel really attached to the characters and the city and everything. Obviously, I love New York, so maybe that's personal bias, but
I think some of that is, and even like the length of the season in world was very short because we were doing it around the stock market crash and the start of the Great Depression. But I think because it was more episodic and it was more like this party than this party, it felt like there could have been months long gaps in between things, or weeks long or days long or whatever. And because it ends on that kind of like, you know, one more for my baby and one more for the road type of note, it just kind of feels like it doesn't have a hard ending. It kind of trails off in a way that there could be something more down the road.
And Ed singing that song. That bastard.
Oh,
that
yeah.
son of a bitch.
That
I remember when he
handsome
pulled it out. I was
bastard
like,
could do it all.
you
Ugh,
son of a
awful.
bitch.
And shout out to Jay Stroutman for providing some piano accompaniment for that.
Oh, so good.
I was wondering where that had come from. Christ, you people and all your friends. It's awful.
It pays to have very talented friends, you know?
Absolutely.
It is, you know, I do want to emphasize that ending note you just said, Brian, because in listening back to episode 4, it was one of the things I was struck by as a contrast to many of our seasons, is it had a very, like, sort of calm, like, denouement of an ending that still felt really satisfying. It was a slower, like you used the word trail off just now, in a way that, like, my producer brain, if you told me, like, that's the ending we're heading towards, I'd be like, what? No, that will never captivate people. But then when I listen to it, I'm like, no, this is, like, really captivating and really beautiful, and the exact wrap up this wants. I don't know if I have a question here. I just, like, it's interesting, the contrast between this and some of our, like, we tend to go real big in our last episodes, and I think it is really fun that this system allowed us to go to a quieter end.
I think we had the big moment of, you know, Hudson and Ed and Fitzroy and Cain and Abel. Like there was that big thing, but more than anything, the ending of this season felt more like a true epilogue than other seasons have had. Yeah. And I think it's partially because, you know, as I was worried about from the beginning, was like, this doesn't feel adventure. It doesn't necessarily want to be like an adventure, like a call to action, a call to adventure or something. It is a series of nights out. It's more like, in the movie category, it'd be more in the realm of like drama than it would be suspense or adventure. And those types of movies, those types of stories can have that slower fade out into this, walk off into the sunset. That is harder to get with, like, you know, our season of Die wanted to be dun 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 dun. Wild Sea wanted to be like, Wild Sea wanted to end with, you know, Captain Jack Sparrow, drink up me hearties yo ho. It wanted to have the big moment right at the end. This one wanted to have the climax of stuff, but then it wanted to see just a little longer than you normally do what happens after that.
And it's so character focused.
It's so character focused. It's so, like, true to life. The thing of, like, great, you had the big epic moment, and now we see just, like, a little longer. I don't want to say that we want to, but, like, if you stay with a character for long enough after the big dramatic moment, it can kind of become a tragedy again. There's that line of the difference between comedy and tragedy depends on where you end the story. And just having a little bit of that longer trail off at the end allows us to see the full repercussions of what happened, and also, like, really get to feel what these characters felt, which was rewarding.
And of those endings, they were in such, like, different positions of, like, each of our 4 characters ending up with a sort of resolving emotional piece that also led forward with a sort of call to more activity in the future. You know, Cain and Abel are going to be driving around to Calgary on their motorcycles. Ludat and Savali are going to be making a play about Hamilton. And with their sort of, like, the difference between, like, brotherly love and the clear, like, unusual creative partnership that's going to happen here with, like, a doting Ludat who is working with Savali on this big thing, but it's a very unusual bond, right? It's kind of like almost I don't think Savali is like, please let me know if this is wrong, Chinook. There is no, like, sexual interest between those two characters, right? They're just fascinated in each other's, like, creative process and interested in it. And then the other end, we have, like, Minnie and Fitz's endearing, beautiful romantic love. You know, each of those being if you follow that slogan we've been using a fair bit, that this is a game where love is overpowered, right? Each of those characters, despite all the stuff that's happening, has ended up with those really satisfying thematic resolutions, each pushing in a different direction. But looking at that line about tragedy and comedy, also, how funny was this series? Like, yeah. I was laughing so much, and also so were our players, and every you know, at home. I think, like, one of my favorite moments of all time in this season was, and I'm sorry to keep bringing it back to Savali, but like that moment where all the other factions think that somehow Savali is like a political mastermind and is like stoking and pulling all the things, the Shallow Grave is the 6th faction in New York. And just that you realizing you kind of dropping that, well, this is what all the other people in the game think. And Chinook just losing it. Like actually losing it on mic.
That's the hardest Chinook's ever left on mic, I think.
I think I even had to cut some out because it was like peaking too much of him just being like, "This is so stupid. I'm just a goofy little guy. Why are they trying to kill me?" It's so funny. I say this in one of the talkbacks that realization that Don Estrazio thinks Savali is like a real threat and a member of a new faction came as I was saying it. I was just like, oh, wait a minute. So from Don Estrazio's perspective, everything is happening because of Savali. Like it all ties back to Savali. Let's just make that a reality.
Murdered Brian, killed my accountant, has caused the downfall of this faction, haven't got my accomplice to be beaten up. Like
it has a real
what a political mastermind.
It has a real like the wrong guy movie vibe of like, no, you've got it wrong. And they're like, no, right. we're gonna kill you. It's like, no, you've got it wrong.
Well, as we come to the end of our season here, I do want to ask you, Zach, about what are you looking forward to as you bring the game to life and bring the community around the game to life now that the backer kit has funded? Like, what are the things you're most excited about coming to Paint the Town Red now that we're on the other side of crowdfunding? And congrats on funding.
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, so I mean, honestly, this has been like personally my enthusiasm baby for a really long time, and I've done a lot of podcasts and a lot of interviews and a lot of like time talking about and advertising this game, and I'm just more than almost ever before so excited for people to read it and get it in their hands and like contribute to the thing that's going to happen. I've not made any plans yet for Paint the Town Red 2 or like what our next wave of adventures or anything looks like that. I'm sure it'll exist in some format. Not sure of the size or the scope yet. I've contacted a load of people about writing, and we've got plans. We've got a load of stretch goals. We've got a solo game, Elliot, that you're writing, which is exciting.
Mm-hmm.
The follow-up to Orbital Blues The Wanderer, but in vampire map-making form. But honestly, the thing that's got me most pumped up, I was kind of talking about this earlier, is the possibility of people making their own adventures for this game and contributing to the kind of mythos and the building the characters. Like, one of the things that is present in a lot of third-party licenses is you can make games that say they are Paint the Town Red adventures or borrow from the mechanics of Paint the Town Red, but like don't steal our words or our characters, make your own stuff. Whereas like the space I'm operating in is that I want my characters to appear in your games as much as possible and vice versa, right?
Right.
I've already stolen an NPC from one of the third-party adventures that's already been written and published and put it in the core book. And I've been borrowing from your stuff and putting it in here and plucking it here. And I want to build this big, expansive place because right now, with what exists, with the published stuff, you can only adventure in Victorian London right now using publicly available material. Whereas once the game comes out, there'll be 6 adventures that Soul Muppet will be releasing. Then there's already going to be a bunch more the community are working on. So the possibility for future vampireness is really good. And the other thing is that the way we've pitched The Morning After, Elliot, is that it's like a map building game about building your own sets of contacts, right?
Yeah, contacts
While
and factions.
That is explicitly a game prep tool that we're doing for GMs, it is also an adventure writing prep tool in principle, right? Because instead of writing that adventure for yourself, you can write it to everyone. And Soul Muppet wants that to happen and does not want any money from you. So go out and do it and make cool shit.
Yeah.
Please. So
Please
I'm excited for that, kind of watching the thing leave my possession and be in my hands and other people picking it up and running with it as I'm sure they will do, as I'm sure they're already done. You can already buy Paint Stockholm Red, which is no less than 3 adventures set throughout the history of Stockholm that
Cool.
My good friend Attis has written. So that's fantastic. And if you're writing something, there's another one that's being developed by somebody in 1950s Cuba. And I've been sending them bits of characters that I think might be relevant for their adventure. So, all kinds of stuff is occurring, and it's going to be rolling, and I just can't wait for people to get their hands on the thing and play it, because that's what games are for.
Yeah. Well, as 2 people, not to speak for you, Brian, who got the opportunity to write in this system and write an adventure, it's a goddamn blast. So I highly, highly recommend.
It is very fun to write adventures for this.
Well, with that, we come to a close on another season of My First Dungeon. On this season of My First Dungeon presents Paint the Town Red. Thank you so much, Zach, for coming back on the show, for sponsoring the season, for supporting what we do here at My First Dungeon. It's always a blast to play your games. We really love your work, and thank you very much for making it.
No, thank you for working with us on playing it.
Brian, any final thoughts on Paint the Town Red before we leave New York City forever? We're still here. We're still here.
No, honestly, this is a really fun game. I think if you enjoyed listening to this season, if you enjoyed listening to this season of Paint the Town Red, if you enjoyed hearing us playing It Never Sleeps, check out this game. And if you enjoyed, our Orbital Blues season and learned those rules, very similar rule system here. If you want to, if you're loving Interview with the Vampire, if you're loving the various Dracula and Bram Stoker adaptations that are coming out, this is the game for you. So come and check it out. Support great independent game designers and have some fun playing some sad vampires.
And one more time, thank you to Zach Cox for writing Paint the Town Red, to Soul Muppet Publishing for sponsoring this season, to all of our players for bringing it to life, and to all of you for listening. That is all for this season of My First Dungeon. And remember, if you're having fun, you're already doing it right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
We can't get ahead, then we're better off dead. So why don't we paint the town red? So why don't you paint the town red, honey? So why don't we paint the town red? Oh, oh, oh. Good night.
If you're hearing this, that means you have listened to every last second of this episode, and that probably makes you a fan of this show. Well, if you're a fan and you like what we're doing and want to help others find it as well, then consider leaving us a 5-star review over on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. Getting more ratings really does help more people find the show, and reading your nice words about the things that we put out into the world makes us feel all warm and good inside, and we want more of those good feels. So head on over to your podcast player of choice and leave us a 5-star review. Thanks.